Hello, my name is Dominic. I'll be presenting my project for the summer REU 2026 at University of Texas at Dallas. My project is trustless cross-chain swaps for privacy coins with Zephyr protocol as the case study. Over the 10 weeks, my project produced 2 sections, a comparative analysis, and then a working implementation. The scope is that privacy coins are underserved by trustless cross-chain infrastructure. Zephyr, a Monero fork with a stablecoin layer, has none at all. Part A is the analysis, swaps versus bridges versus exchanges on 2 axes, dependability and privacy. And then part B builds the missing infrastructure. So before we get into the research questions, this is the whole problem in one picture. On the left, you have how privacy coins work today. So you buy through a centralized exchange and then you sell through a centralized exchange. And usually it's a centralized exchange both times for both transactions. And since you're doing it through a centralized exchange, they're holding on to your identity and they have logs. So the coin's own privacy is untouched due to its functionality and how the coin operates. But the boundary on where privacy leaks is a little bit different because you can de-anonymize somebody by observing both the buy and the sell transaction. So although the coin itself might be a privacy coin, if the centralized exchange can see both transactions, then you're able to de-anonymize the person doing the transaction. There is privacy attack literature on this, with Kopos and colleagues on Zcash and Moser and colleagues on Monero, both showing that anonymity collapses at a repeated identifiable endpoint. So a buy and a sell. On the right is what an atomic swap market changes. On the right is what an atomic swap market looks like. You trade with peers, different peers each time. So whenever you want to sell and buy, you have to find a new peer. Since you're trading it with different people at different times, there's not a single endpoint on who's tracking you or what you've sent or received. And then the transparent side of the trade is still visible on its own chain. The peers is the party who was there both times. So it's going to be different people at different times. So it's not going to look like an actual buy or sell signal. It's just going to be a simple transaction. And then the difference is what this project is for. This brings us to our 3 main research questions. How do the 3 methods of moving value across chains compare when it comes to dependability and privacy? What exactly needs to change to port the Monero atomic swap to a fork like Zephyr? Because there's already a working implementation on Monero. What additional steps are required to reach Ethereum-style chains? We've answered all 3 questions, and those answers are backed up by actual runs you can verify on public blockchains. For the rest of the talk, we'll follow this arc, the foundational studies we build upon, a look at how swaps work, and then we'll tackle each research question in turn. So let's briefly touch on the related studies. So starting with the 3 of our projects rest directly on. First is Vitalik Buterin's argument in 2022, a bridged asset is only ever secure as the bridge it's on. Furthermore, the more value a bridge holds, the larger a target it becomes for attackers. We took this exact lens and applied it specifically to privacy. Next is Gugger's 2020 paper, which details the exact construction we ported. This is a trustless Bitcoin to Monero swap built on adapter signatures. Crucially, it doesn't require any scripting on the Monero side because Zephyr inherits all the necessary features from Monero. This port was technically feasible in the first place. Finally, we have Harley's 2018 work provides our formal safety model. Harley established that in an atomic swap, no honest party can ever end up worse off. We took those theoretical guarantees and turned them into a rigorous passing test matrix for Zephyr, and we'll share that later in the talk. So I've made the rest of the related works into a single view because the swap we ported isn't a single invention. It's a stack of different projects built up for the past 20 years. So in 2003, Bonet and his colleagues introduced the encrypted signature idea for fair exchanges. In 2017, Polestra evolved this into the adapter signature or scriptless scripts, which allows a coin without scripting capabilities to participate in a swap. So for instance, Monero. In 2018, or no ether, created the zero knowledge proof that binds a single secret across two different mathematical curves, which is essential for the case of Bitcoin. Then in 2019, Fournier adapted these signatures to work natively on Bitcoin's own scheme. Finally, in 2020, Gugger brought all these pieces together into a complete Bitcoin to Monero protocol that we're porting today. Our project represents the logical step in this timeline, taking that exact construction, carrying it to a Monero-derived coin, and then extending it to 3 additional chain families. Now, for our methodology, we worked across 3 distinct tracks: a basic swap fork for the Bitcoin family, 2 independent engines for the Ethereum-style chains that utilize one small escrow contract, a purpose-built harness for Cardano that doesn't require any smart contract at all. So the key takeaway from this figure is that our design choice, all 3 tracks settle against the exact same scriptless Zephyr leg. This means Zephyr adaptations only had to be measured once and could be reused across the board. Our dataset consists of the actual swap runs themselves with the transactions archived. Wherever a public testnet exists, these transactions are completely public. So this is the entire swap mechanism in one picture. Utilizing the real transactions from our very first Zephyr Bitcoin swap, Bitcoin holds the scripted lock. Since Zephyr is completely scriptless, Bitcoin has to be the follower, so it has to hold the scripted lock. Zephyr simply holds an ordinary private payment to a joint address. To claim the Bitcoin, you're forced to publish a signature. That signature inherently reveals the missing half of the Zephyr key to your counterparty. In short, taking your side of the trade automatically hands over the keys to theirs. If anything goes wrong or someone walks away, time lock refunds return the assets to both sides. So that's like the definition of atomicity or atomicity. So there's no custodian required. So let's go one level deeper on the next slide to see how this works. So the great news is that this entire cryptographic construction boils down to some simpler lines of math. First is the lock. The Zephyr spend key is a sum of 2 secret halves, A plus BA. Because neither party holds the whole key, neither party can spend the funds alone. So the second is the reveal, which is the absolute heart of this project. One party pre-signs their claim. This pre-signature, which we will call S, is missing a secret of offset T. To actually take the coins, they have to publish the finished signature S, where S equals some part of S plus T. This means anyone holding the pre-signature can simply subtract T equals S minus some part of S. That recovered T is the counterparty's missing key half. Claiming your side mathematically publishes the key to theirs. That single line of subtraction is what makes the swap perfectly atomic without needing any custodian anywhere in the loop. Third is the bridge. That is the same secret has to live on both chain curves. Because Bitcoin's curve differs from Monero's, the protocol requires an extra zero knowledge proof to confirm that both points hide the same T. However, Cardano signs Monero's native curve. Therefore, the extra proof is entirely unnecessary, which is exactly why our Cardano result later is actually simpler, not harder. And underpinning all this, 2 time lock deadlines ensure that if anyone abandons the trade, both sides get their money back. Here's the entire project viewed as like a single arc. It begins with our core problem, a privacy coin that can only be accessed through centralized or custodial exchanges leaking privacy as soon as you place a transaction. And then part A, the analysis, it makes 2 major predictions. First, if you remove the persistent endpoint, the privacy leak shrinks. Second, a single structural test can determine which chains are even capable of hosting a swap, because certain coins can't be followers and certain coins can't be leaders. Part B, the build, confirms both of these predictions. The port worked with essentially just one source code change. The compatibility boundary was exactly as sharp as we predicted, and the same construction successfully reached 3 additional chain families. The result, all 3 research questions were answered with publicly verifiable runs, plus we got 2 fantastic surprises: a completely contract-free Cardano route or ADA route, a real-world event in Zephyr's history that perfectly proved our dependability argument. So let's walk through these results. Research question 1, here's the comparison. There are 3 ways to move your value across change. First is centralized exchanges, which requires you to hand over custody. You entirely exposed if they face insolvency or seizure. Recovery is a legal nightmare, and it's rarely full. Not everybody gets their money. And we all know the case list, which we have Mt. Gox, FTX, and as I'll explain shortly, Zephyr has its own recent audit issues. Bridges pull massive amounts of value behind a verification mechanism. As they grow, they become massive targets. There's no built-in recovery mechanism, leading to 9-figure hacks like Ronin, Wormhole, Nomad, and BNB, which is Binance's own chain. Atomic swaps, however, keep value on native chains safely under the owner's private keys. Only the 2 parties involved in a specific swap are exposed, and time-locked refunds are hard-coded into the process. And going back to the Capos, and Moser privacy points, the swaps eliminate the persistent identifiable endpoints that attackers use to de-anonymize users. The atomic swaps is one mechanism that actually gets safer as it scales. Moving on to research question 2, this is where Part A's prediction meets Part B's hard evidence. For the Zephyr to Bitcoin swap, all 8 of our safety tests passed. This includes the happy path, both refund paths, going in both directions. This is Hurley's theoretical guarantee made strictly empirical. The biggest news here is how little actually had to change. It took exactly 1 source code change in the wallet. Furthermore, the compatibility boundary was razor sharp, exactly as our single structural test predicted. Litecoin required 0 changes. Bitcoin needed 5, while Dash and PivX proved to be impossible for clearly stated and testable reasons. What did the port actually take? Let me tell you through 3 short stories, because how we got here matters just as much as the result. So first, that 1 source change, a Zephyr lock requires decoys, and the wallet code asks for them starting at a hard-coded mainnet height. So this is tied to Zephyr's audit fork, which they had a very big issue. So a short test chain never reaches that height, meaning it failed every single time. The fix was a simple line clamp. The tricky part was the obvious fix, getting it based on the network type, which was dead code, because the wallet forces itself to run as mainnet even on a private chain. We also wrote a small proxy to allow the official unmodified binary to work just as well. Second, we found a real bug. Our safety tests uncovered a refund fault in Bitcoin Cash's swaps that only triggered when the 2 time locks were different. We fixed it, and the fix was actually merged upstream for basic swap for everybody to use. Third, we compared everything else against Monero's interface. The only differences were related to Zephyr stablecoin fields within the wallet. So the cryptography itself never had to change, and that is the reality of porting the construction to a fork. So for research question 3, we looked at extending this infrastructure. For research question 3, we looked at extending the infrastructure. The identical construction successfully settled on 3 public Ethereum testnet tiles. They had matching gas costs and ran against real public Monero tests. A Zephyr leg even ran against a real Avalanche using 2 independent engines. So what does it take to add a completely new chain? You allow its network ID pointed at a node, and then you deploy the smart contract. So the private side of the transaction never has to change. Once again, this was the analysis predicting the outcome, and then building and confirming it. Now for our first unplanned result, Cardano, our boundary test showed that Cardano was a valid candidate, and remarkably, the swap there requires no smart contract, no covenant, and a plain native script is enough to hold the lock because Cardano signs using the same exact curve as Monero, which was actually probably about the most difficult cryptographic hurdle, which was the cross-curve proof that was required for the XMR to Bitcoin transactions. And it vanishes due to the fact that Monero and Cardano use the same cryptographic curve. So there's no need for a cryptographic cross-curve $0 proof. So we settled both. So we settled both the claim and the refund on two public Cardano test networks, which you can verify on any block explorer. And that identical harness then successfully swapped ADA for Zephyr. So I want to quickly cover the roads we closed. A boundary criterion is only scientifically credible if it rules. If it rules things out, not just in. We had three major cases here. First, Avalanche X chain could not lead a swap. The interesting part is that we actually disproved the assumed reason why. So everyone thought that transaction ID malleability would block it, but our source level analysis showed that the ID is effectively non-malleable. The true blocker is that its time lock simply can't express the claim now, refund later asymmetry that a leader requires, because for the Monero Bitcoin adaptive signature, or for any kind of privacy coin adaptive signature, since Zephyr and Monero are scriptless, there needs to be a scripted coin attached to the transaction that will serve as the follower, so that the Monero or Zephyr or scriptless coin can latch onto the leader. So the true blocker is that its time lock simply can't express the claim now, refund later asymmetry that a leader requires. And since a privacy coin can only ever act as a follower, no viable pair exists. Second, XRP is the exact opposite of the situation because it works perfectly with no contract via its native escrow. However, the method publishes the swap shared secret into a labeled, easily queryable object on the public ledger, and it's the leakiest it's the leakiest arrangement we found. So we threw it out purely out on privacy grounds because it's just too it leaks too much data. And then finally for Dash, PivX, and Tron, those three coins fundamentally do not fit the lock criterion. So our criteria has real teeth. It accurately predicts technical failures, privacy standards, and confidently rejects a route even if it technically works. So this is where Part A heavily judged Part B. Within the swap family itself, privacy exists on a gradient depending on how the other chain holds the lock. So on a Bitcoin style chain, the swap looks completely indistinguishable from an ordinary transaction. On a covenant chain, a determined analyst has actively. On a covenant chain, a determined analyst has to actively harvest data. But on a contract chain, every single swap is enumerable at one address with a single query. It acts as a standing registry. So this is the exact persistent endpoint that Kopos and Moser warned us about. So this is reappearing right on the chain itself. So our analysis didn't just ascribe our build; it graded it. So at the grade, and that grade dictated our contribution strategy. So the highly private Bitcoin family work was pushed upstream to the main project, while the lower tier contract work will remain a research for. Our second unplanned result was the most striking because real world history proved our part A for us. So a few slides back, I made a structural argument about centralized exchanges. Zephyr actually lived the demonstration. After suspected unauthorized minting, Zephyr had to freeze its chain and force every holder to reapprove their coins. This recovery only works if you hold your own keys. The single participant that could not comply with this audit was a centralized exchange holding a massive pooled balance. To fix this, the chain had to mint roughly 30% of its circulating supply completely unaudited. To be completely precise about the casualty here, the exchange did not cause the initial bug, and atomic swaps would not have prevented the bug. However, what trustless liquidity would have completely changed is the recovery process. If users held their own key, every holder could have proved their own coins, and no forced unaudited mint would have been necessary. Since the majority of the users had to buy and sell through centralized exchanges, they did not have access to their keys, so they were unable to participate in the financial audit that Zephyr did in order to keep the network safe. And we argued this structurally, but Zephyr's history proved it in practice. So let's look at the deliverables. Our final integrated paper combines the analysis with the implementation, anchoring every single result onto on-chain transactions. So all of the code is public, and the raw evidence is safely archived. Furthermore, our work is already making an impact upstream. The refund path bug we found in BasicSwap is merged and fixed, and the Zephyr coin module itself has been submitted, and it's currently openly mergeable and is currently under maintainer review. I want to be transparent about the limits of this work, which are stated clearly in the paper. First, Zephyr doesn't have a public test network like Monero or Avalanche or Ethereum. So its legs had to run on a private reg test chain. So even when the counterparty chain was fully public, that's a hard ceiling on Zephyr's side right now. Second, the timing fingerprint. Once you strip away identifiers and amounts, the timing is the only way left to correlate the two legs of the swap. We make a structural argument about this, but we didn't measure it because it requires a lot of real mainnet traffic in order to do so. So we can't confirm or deny that privacy access. And then third, these are proof of concepts, not fully audited consumer products. The Cardano harness, for instance, currently drives both parties from a single process, although the secret reveals are still genuinely extracted on-chain. Fourth, cryptography alone doesn't solve the liquidity issue. So a brand new market will have a thin order book and wide spreads, which hurts both economics and privacy. And that perfectly bridges to my next slide. So what comes next? So we see three distinct tracks here. The first track is our project's core proposition, and I want to emphasize this. Today, the maker side of the swap platforms like BasicSwap are largely automated with market-making bots and auto-accept strategies, but the taker side, the everyday user, is where people give up. So they face heavy multi-daemon installs and raw requests for quote pages and terrible user experience. So these are packaging problems, not protocol problems. If we give takers a smooth trading app experience, complete with charts and live order books, sitting on top of peer-to-peer flows, we solve this. This isn't just about polishing a product, because atomic swap dependability improves with scale, and a denser flow of swaps obscures timing fingerprints. Growing liquidity on trustless rails is directly a dependable and privacy intervention. So if we can make the user experience and the user interface better, then we can move away from centralized exchanges and bridges and make transactions more dependable and more private. And the second track is measurement, right? So we need to measure what we've argued, the timing fingerprint of when transactions were sent and received, the data aggregation costs on different chains, and how non-custodial settlements affects the spread. So the third track is cryptographic frontier. So the randomized nonce of the ED25519 adapter we demonstrated can be ported to the entire same curve family. Implementing watchtower refunds would allow for mobile clients, and finally swapping directly from one privacy coin to another privacy coin remains a genuine research wall until Monero itself changes its protocol, which is incredibly hard. Thank you all so much for your time. The final slide contains my references. So these are the key references that directly supported this talk, including the Copos and Moser attack studies that form the backbone of our privacy argument, the final published paper that includes the complete 47 entry list with the full URLs and access dates. Thank you.